introduce you to Paul Mallon, who's the founder of Bolero, which is one of the founders, sorry, and which was an effort to digitize bills of lading. What was first?
1999.
Okay. So, well, to get the ball rolling, I'd like to start off with the presentation.
So I'm very grateful for the fantastic introduction I got. We'll address some of these things. What I wanted to do really is to sort of run through some of the basics and draw some parallels between the experiences we've had in trying to bring a digital VL to market and what some of the issues that I think will face new technology which tries to do the same thing or the same thing in a better way or in a different way. Just wait until we pull mine up and I'll run through the agenda. Hopefully I'll remember some of the questions that got asked, but if I forget, please remind me. We've been dealing with these issues for quite some time. It's not like a rock face. So I wanted to really, here's a sort of brief outline about what I want to talk about. The history of the electronic bill of lading. You've heard something of the history of the traditional bill of lading, some of the issues that face it. So we'll touch on electronic bills of lading. It won't surprise you to hear that it wasn't novel even when Bolero started. And I want to show you some of the chronology of Bolero. This is the sales pitch. This is really just to position some of the things I'm intending to sell today. Drawing some parallels, some observations I've made. I've been following blockchain relatively closely, seeing what the issues are. Drawing some parallels between what's happening with distributed ledger technology and the commercial robustness of the internet. When the internet first became commercially robust, so not in the late 60s, but more the late 90s. And then linking the technology with business process and law. The lawyers that spoke before, they have the benefit in resolving those disputes in many centuries of case law and statute across the world, international maritime conventions which support the trades. Electronic transactions, very little case law. How does that work? How do we reproduce the results in electronic form that we see in paper form? How can business people transacting significant transactions worth many millions of dollars be sure that they'll get the same predictability that they get in their standard transactions? Where are those risks? How do we pass those risks between various parties? Then I want to talk a little bit about the challenge of replication. So replication, what I call is replication versus innovation. I think it's something that was mentioned in the first presentation today, is that culturally, I think things have changed quite a lot since Bolero first started. So I remember when I first was discussing with people who would print out all their emails, talk about cyberspace, say that things didn't really exist. Well, most people that we deal with now don't have that same sort of slightly old-fashioned approach to technology. They're used to dealing with technology in their everyday lives for important transactions like their bank accounts, from a business point of view, payroll, accounts payables, and those sorts of things. And then I want to talk about some of the challenges, and we've seen quite a number of challenges, and I think many of those will be the same in any other sort of technical implementation of a bill of lading or an electronic trading system. So, quick history of electronic bills of lading. The first electronic bills of lading were devised in the mid-80s, early to mid-80s. An organisation called CDOCS. It was operated by a bank called Chase Manhattan, which is now rolled into something else. And essentially that worked as a single banking system where the original bill of lading was produced, and then rather than being passed from party to party, it was secured with CDOCS, who acted as the custodian of that document. And then electronic EDI messages were used to trade the right to the document. Now that didn't take off for a number of reasons. One of the principal reasons was very proprietary. It was a single bank that was operating. And their objective really was to heavily traded oil cargoes. You might see 16 or 17 sale transactions in a chain before the oil finally reaches port. Bill of lading never arrived. Probably never did at the end anyway. That was not successful. Next, and this really sort of was the genesis of Bolero, and I won't refer to this, but quite a lot of our contractual structure, the contractual makeup of Bolero is based on the use of these rules, which are devised by Maritime, International, which is the International Association of Maritime Lawyers. And that was devised in the early 90s, looking at ways in which the technology, the new technology, they talked about keys for the first time, so people were exchanging their keys. So there was an interaction between every time a bill of lading, the electronic bill of lading was passed from one party to another, the carrier would then confirm to the next holder that he was in fact the holder of the bill and he would deliver to him. So they were rules rather than technical implementation. Then we had Bolero, and I'll talk about a little bit about the history of Bolero on the next slide. So what we've looked to do is to replicate the functions of a bill. And you heard earlier what those functions are: the receipt of the cargo, contract of carriage, and title to the goods. So we've looked to recreate those functions in exactly the same way, with exactly the same predictable results as you've seen in the paper document. Not solving all the problems, nothing's perfect, but to replicate those functions exactly. And more recently, we've seen other companies coming to the space, a company called S-Docs, which is a competitor of ours, and yet another one, a company called E-Title, which also is a smaller iteration which uses slightly different technology. So it's been around for a while. This is what I'm saying here. It's not novel. Electronic bills of lading have been around as an idea for more than 30 years. So the chronology of Bolero, the company I worked for, this started in the early 90s with a BIMCO initiative. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with what BIMCO is. Effectively, it's a ship owners organisation. The reason they became interested in this was the increase in the incidence of bills being, cargo having to be discharged without bills of lading. You've heard about the sorts of problems that can create earlier on. So they were looking for ways in which was it possible to bring in some new technology which would make it more easy for those bills to move more quickly, so that owners wouldn't be commercially pressed to deliver cargo without bills. And then came an opportunity then to try and commercialise this. There was a user group which was founded in London, had quite a broad membership, called the Bolero Association. And they took things a little bit further. They engaged in some proof of concept activities. In particular, they looked at fixing digital signatures to documents, digital signatures to messages. How could I use digital signature technology, cryptography, to ensure that the document couldn't be changed? So that was the Bolero Association. The Bolero Association then looked to a number of parties to try and commercialise this. And one of the parties that they looked to was Swift. I'm sure most people are familiar with what Swift does in bank messaging. Swift recognised that it couldn't do this on its own. This wouldn't be seen as purely a bank initiative, so it formed a joint venture with TTFA, which is a maritime insurer where I was working, to bring this to market. So we commercially launched. It was a big fanfare. Turns out the world really wasn't ready 15 years ago for this. There was some initial use. The product hasn't really changed very much since then. We'll come back to where we are now. So the product was commercially launched. There was some use of electronic bills, but not a whole lot. We then, we kind of suffered from benefited from the internet boom. Lots of interest, and we suffered still on the downside as the internet bust happened. So we refocused our product on what we call the multi-bank some relatively lower functionality type of product. The interaction between banks and corporate to apply for a letter of credit, be advised of a letter of credit, or apply for guarantees. So we refocused our business on that. One of the customers that was using that application understood, well, actually, we'd like to revisit the presentation. So the presentation of electronic documents under a letter of credit, which Joshua mentioned earlier. So we've begun since 2011 to really move back into recorded presentation, which uses an electronic bill of lading and other electronic documents, including electronic seal labels. So that's where Bolero is at the moment. Now I wanted to draw some parallels between distributed ledger technology and the birth of the internet. It wasn't really the birth of the internet. What I mean is the commercially available part of the internet. Many ideas of driverless cars, chain of custody, and identity. Some of these are good, and some of these not so good, really. You mentioned that blockchain is not for everything, and I totally agree with you. There are some cases where some of the more, more evangelistic types will say, well, blockchain is the answer to the question. That's simply not the case. What I've noticed, however, is the buzz, the movement associated with this, and particularly the funding that's flowing into it, means there's a lot more interest in it. I doubt that we'll be able to run a seminar on bills of lading and attract such a diverse audience without the benefit of the buzz from distributed ledger technology and also the amount of money that's gone in. I've been attending sort of distributed ledger meetings for about 2 years, taking an interest and follow what's going on. The proportion of the suits to ponytails has increased dramatically in the last 2 years. There aren't any ponytails. Maybe it's because no tattoos, no ponytails. So it's when the business starts to get interested, and the money starts to flow in, and the press machines start to work, the buzz starts to pick up. You begin to see some people who want to see some returns on their money. That's benefited our business. We're seeing a bigger increase and bigger interest in digitalisation of trade. One thing I sort of wanted to mention is technology plus an idea. So, piece of infrastructure, idea, doesn't equal a product. There's something in the middle. There's quite a lot in the middle actually, and most of the hard work is in the middle, mapping what the technology can do to deliver value to that idea. How do I make that technology fit, or how do I blend that technology to make it into something that's going to be used? We can talk about it, but how do we monetize that? How's that going to be kept going? Now, the other issue we faced, and I'll touch on it later, is who's in a position to lead on standardising. The question arose before, and I think you answered that you felt that the various platforms would be able to talk to each other. That's not currently the case with internet protocols. People use the same sort of standards, but they're not interoperable. They might be interoperable, much more easily interoperable than they were beforehand, but they're not interoperable. And they're not interoperable at the business process side. So there needs to be quite a lot of work done in terms of making sure that those, at least the base level technology, the base level processes are similar. And that goes kind of counter to where investors will want to go, which is I want to make market share. I don't really want to share my brilliant thinking. I don't really want to share my proprietary information. I want to make the most money as I can, and I don't want to share it with other people. The other sort of observation we see here, I think it remains to be seen, where we have who will benefit from new technology coming in. Will it be the disruptors, or will it simply be the establishment? Will it be IBM? Will it be the big banks who are investing huge sums of money? Or will it be somebody emerging? Now, we posed the same question 20 years ago, exactly the same question would have arisen. I think we've kind of seen what the answer is. We've seen that Amazon, Google, and eBay are very significantly larger than the establishment that was the same then. Will those companies be usurped by some newer technology companies who really aren't sort of at the cutting edge? And the challenge for investors will be which one, how good are you picking the best ones, because there's better to choose from. The other thing is, what characterises this sort of this technical development phase is a very much an open kind of system. It's common source, open source code, those sorts of things. And we've, as an established technology company, we engage with particular vendors. We look to sign or non-disclosure agreement. We'll share some secrets with you, but don't tell anyone else. If you tell us secrets, we won't tell anyone else. The purest DLT companies don't want to sign non-disclosure agreements. That's against the principle of openness and open source and transparency. Well, that kind of won't work as things begin to get monetized. So it's just an example where we've got that there will be at some point people who see an opportunity to make lots of money who don't necessarily want to share as much as they should. Bringing it back to towards field of lading, I want to talk a little bit about technology, business process, law. As I mentioned before, the law relating to bills of lading, which is not one of these. There are many iterations of this around the world, various jurisdictions. And that's evolved over many, many years. There are many examples, much precedent, case law, statutes, international conventions which deal with how bills of lading work and what the rights and responsibilities of the various parties are. That doesn't really work for new ways of doing business. So we have to think of a new way of making sure that those same legal results happen. So that's really beginning to think, well, what's our objective here? Are we trying to make sure that things stay the same? Are we looking to manage exception, or are we looking to deal with the new? The first thing I think to do is to establish the benefits. What are, in a business sense, who are the beneficiaries of the new technology? Does this actually help anyone? Does it solve some edge cases? Some edge cases, we've had edge cases before. So by the time it's got to lawyers and into litigation, this is very much an edge case. Or is it a universal benefit? Are there business efficiencies? Are there true benefits to bringing this forward? And I'd say there are in terms of business efficiencies, improvement in working capital, accuracy of information, the use of data, the removal of repetitive, unnecessary human intervention, which creates thousands of extremely boring jobs of checking various things. But you need really to establish what those benefits are. And then the next layer for me was what comes first? Do you build some technology and then try and work out what the rules are, what the business processes and what the legal framework should be, or do you do the business processes and the legal first and then build the technology? I think it's actually an iterative process. So there's a baseline of the technology, and we're looking at what that technology can do from a functional point of view, how would that fit into the business process, and how would we characterize the outcome of that business process from a legal perspective. One of the things that's the use case for DLT we talk about a lot in London is the ability to settle trades. So we've heard about high volume. highly volatile trading, the instantaneous transactions, the nanoseconds of transactions. So you can buy and sell in nanoseconds, but it takes 3 days to settle that transaction. So one of the sort of buzz expressions there is delivery against payment, so that the trade is settled much more quickly using distributed ledger technology than it is currently. This is called delivery against payment. And delivery against payment is not really particularly novel. If you think of a vending machine, that's delivery against payment. So there's nothing particularly novel about some of the stuff we're talking about. And as society becomes more evolved, risk plays a huge role. And it's really the assessment of risk, which is, I think, one of the main factors on the adoption of new types of technology and new types of processes. So all efforts in terms of identifying where the risks are, reducing them, but really just sort of identifying what they are is really important. So predictability means that you can provide measures to minimize that risk and certainly to work out who's responsible should anything go wrong, should one of those things happen. Here is where I sort of contradict myself. As I say, our approach has traditionally been to try and create an environment, an electronic environment which mimics, which looks exactly like the paper transaction. So we have an electronic bill of lading, which is bank finance, is submitted electronically to a bank who will then check those documents and send it to the issuing bank, who will then, everything's in order, will send that to the buyer, who will then present that electronic bill of lading back to the carrier in return for the cargo. But it's exactly the same as in a paper process, it's just faster, quicker, and more secure. So what we've done is replicate. And I think around about 2000, that was probably the right decision. Because there was some concern about what is all this electronic stuff, what is this internet, what is these cyberspace stuff, as I mentioned before. And now I think times have changed. The types of people who are involved in devising products, devising systems, conduct their lives electronically. They do their sort of shopping online, they bank online, they date online. They're much more familiar with using technology and using the internet to conduct their business. So whereas a sales call for me 15 years ago would be all about servers and security, how do I know this works, how do I know you're not copying this document, how do I know you can't be sure, I trust paper bills of lading, well, we've heard before how trustworthy paper bills of lading are. But now that conversation shifted, it's more about how I can use this more effectively, how I can use this to improve my current business processes. And perhaps this is the time now to think of moving away from replication and thinking of ways in which we can redesign business processes to produce commercial results that we still want to see, but without necessarily looking exactly like electronification of the paper process. We're looking, as I say there, to look at business outcomes, not to replicate those business processes. Finally, I went to, on this particular slide, I went to about characterization is key. How do we know what these things mean? End state is everyone's agreed that this technology does this, therefore we just use the technology, therefore we don't need to engage in lengthy, complex contractual negotiations. But there's quite a bit before that when people actually understand and agree that software is going to be used for is characterized. Am I transferring the right to delivery of stuff? At some point there is an agreement between the parties that participate that that's the effect that these messages moving. So the characterization of the transaction is really important. But also, for me as a lawyer, what's really important is the terminology. I hear a lot about smart contracts. From a lawyer, from a legal point of view, describes a smart contract as a contract, certainly not a legal contract. It might be the execution of the activities under a contract, but it's not a contract per se. So some of the terminology that needs to be carefully looked at before people jump to conclusions. So what have we found to be our challenges? I think the challenges for blockchain have not been similar to. Firstly, look at a full solution, not just the infrastructure. Don't simply think you can provide tools and expect that people will use those tools to build up their solutions. It's really time to market is really influenced by the quality of the solution you provide, not just the quality of the infrastructure. It needs a lot of a layer of usability. Blockchains at the moment, everyone's seen the user interfaces for these, they're not so attractive. It's hard to see from an everyday use point of view how you would introduce that into an operational environment. Remember also that it's better but not perfect. There are lots of things that it does better, but it's not perfect. One of the issues we've had is the response being, well, I'm comfortable with paper. How secure is your electronic system? Well, my electronic system is many, many times more secure than the paper system, but it's not perfect. So I think it's important that we did recognise in the first presentation that it's not infallible. The electronics are not infallible, but try and pitch it so that we're judged against a better, not a perfect environment. Standardisation is really important. I've got doubts as to whether that's achievable. I think we'll see a race to who wins and who controls what those standards are. But certainly in terms of interoperability, it's attractive at macro level, at micro level, where people want to make money. It's not so important. Except if you want to use my standard and my standard alone, in which case I'm Bolero standard, I'm thrilled. That's great, but somebody else's, a bit less. Building communities, what we have here, and the reason I think that blockchain is seen as a trade and trade finance is seen as an interesting area for blockchain is because it's quite complicated. There are lots of diverse parties, there are lots of different actors, banks, there are carriers, there are importers, exporters, there are traders, there are insurers, customs authorities. There's a whole range of different types of organisations involved. It's very diverse. Wouldn't it be nice if these could all share information so that we're all on the same page, we're all dealing with that? But it is if they all want to be on the same page, not necessarily the case. That builds on to my next sub-bullet point there, which is building a case for, in my view, there are no losers in this. I mean, there might be some people who make money on the inefficiencies, but really the sort of the main players, there's no losers. People don't lose out because of this, but there are certainly some winners. There are certainly some parts of the trade chain which don't really stand to benefit. It makes no difference to me whether it's paper or electronic. I carry on, I make my money, I make my business. Why should I bother? So it's trying to bring those non-winners into the fold to articulate the benefits of data, the benefits of the efficiency for them. So that's the challenge. What's also challenging is the very diverse nature of this, which is not just cross-market, so it's not just banks, carriers, importers, exporters, traders, insurers, etc. It's lots of people in different parts of those organisations. So for a corporate, an exporting corporate, it's their sales department, it's their marketing department, it's their treasury, it's their logistics department. Some of these very large companies, they don't really have too much interaction. It's bringing together not just a cross-industry, it's cross-function within those parts of business. There are some entrenched market practices, and often we will be challenged on what those. We'll be challenged on the edge cases. What would you do if how would we resolve, what if the electronic bill of lading has not arrived? Well, you have to issue another one as soon as you do that. But you know that probably was an obvious reason why the electronic bill of lading hadn't arrived, and that's because the importer hadn't paid for the goods. But there are entrenched positions, so it's difficult to overcome those. There are still people who feel comfort in the touch of a bill of lading. They can smell an original. I think that it's reducing in number. Most people now who check bills of lading, certainly now for LCs, don't actually see them. They see a scanned version come up on the screen. Prioritisation. Is this significant enough? Is there enough benefit in the business for this to be a priority? It does require work. It's not plug and play. Is this one of your top priorities for the next quarter, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? The prioritisation is important, and as a consequence, that means defining the benefits very clearly and defining what the return on investment is. And that's from both the technology provider and also from potential users. You have to be patient. It's not something that was built over 1,000 years, then it's not going to be changed in 6 months. It's going to take a fair amount of time to go through. But once it does begin to catch fire, then it can move very quickly. The analogy I use is airline tickets. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember turning up to the airline counter with your pink and blue bits of paper if you're doing multiple flights and not have a book. How horrible it was if you lost that book halfway through your trip. And the idea of turning up at the airport with a ticket these days doesn't happen. And that happened very quickly. The technology to enable that to happen was around for a long time before it eventually did. But now it's almost unheard of. With a single piece of paper, everything's digitised, everything's on the phone.
It was driven by cost savings.
But you might say, well, that's a rather easier challenge than bills of lading. But if you think about it, so much tied up in a boarding pass, particularly things like security. So there's no mean feat to do.
The other thing that's going to slow it down, and certainly slows pretty much everything down when you've got new technology, is if I've got too much to choose from, if the menu's too big, I end up not making a choice. I end up sitting down and waiting to see that choice stay down. I don't want to back something just in case it's the wrong thing. It puts buyers off. There's too much noise, there's too much discussion, too many options. I won't rent the video at all. I won't bother. I won't pick anything from this menu. I'll go next door where they've got 5 things to pick from. As I mentioned earlier, the return on investment. At some point, the amount of money that's being poured into this is going to want to see some returns. If it's going to see those returns, it's got to prove the value it's delivering to the customer, and that's provable by it becoming monetized. Who's going to pay for it? Is it sustainable? So those are some of the sort of challenges that we face, different degrees, some of them now, some of them historic. I hope that's of some help. I realise I haven't addressed any of the questions that got kind of pumped during the earlier session, but I'm more than happy to take those again now.
Thank you so much. It's really fascinating, and I really appreciate your insight, because you're literally on like the kind of front line of what change is going to look like for your industry. I guess the really basic question I have is, what stops you from looking at decentralized lending technology or blockchain and implementing it as the back end of your system? You've identified many challenges, which I get, but is there one kind of particular item? Is it the lack of ROI? Is it the lack of kind of adoption? Is it the cost? Is it the lack of development technology? Is there one or a few things that really stop you? And I guess also, what is the one thing that would make you then do it? What's the tipping point?
The tipping point, well, I think it's a mixture of those things. It would be easy to pick one and then I fix it.
it was plumbing, and yeah, but I don't think it's. I mean, some of the technology that's some of the stuff that's associated with blockchain isn't sort of state of the art, state of the market. Digital signature technology, for example, has been around for 20 years. Bolero uses digital signature technology for identity encryption purposes. It uses hash values for the immutability of data. So a lot of the sort of the functions of blockchain from a practical point of view are already there and already implemented. So it's not necessarily for us the plumbing that's the issue. If I knew the answer to blending all of those challenges, which I believe we're beginning to work through, we're beginning to see some excellent development stuff going on. Make some money.
Oh, we have time for one more question.
Okay. Joshua.
All right, I guess that's a question. Great. Would you be willing to move away from your standard towards a more, say, ICC standard for EBLs, if it would lead to more market participation in EBLs?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, we're working with ICC at the moment on that.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Just leading on to two other questions. Like James was saying, and what you showed on your slides here about the infrastructure being available. Now, I take it that not everyone, not all the players have to be on the blockchain. You could have some using, web, internet-based protocol, and then maybe between some players, they move to the blockchain technology to exchange the data. Yeah. That's number one. And then tied to that, the standardization. The question that came up here is what we need to do is basically exchange information, exchange data, and data then transfer into value ultimately. Yeah. So, Gian was saying that he envisageable with blockchains, different types of blockchains talk to each other. I'm just curious to know what is the standardization part of that, because there has to be some standardization in order to be interoperable.
I agree with you. I'm an observer rather than an expert on blockchain. I think you could pose that one to somebody who knows better than me.
Sorry to be abrupt. The next speaker's got a hard stop, so we're going to move on to.
Okay.
Thank you so much.